Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the Z Exchange. Just a couple notes before we do get started. I wanted to let you know we are recording today's session, so if for any reason you aren't able to stay, or if you want to share the session or just revisit any of the moments, I'll be emailing you after the presentation, and we can get you a link out to this presentation so you can watch it on your own time. We also have Q&A available, so if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to write into the box at any time. We'll leave a little bit of time at the end of the presentation to go over any questions you may have for Glenn. That being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for joining us today for From Chaos to Clarity, Productive Workdays and Fast-Moving Tech Teams with Mr. Glenn Anderson. Glenn has 40 years as an IBM veteran, and he's now bringing his leadership experience to audiences through engaging presentations on teamwork, collaboration, and communication. With that being said, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Glenn. Thank you so much.
All righty, thanks, Sammy. And let me share my screen here so we have some slides to look at. All right, everything looking good?
Looks great, Glenn.
So, welcome everyone to our exploration of what it means and how you can have more productive and effective work days. And let me begin by describing an object lesson, a visual object lesson. A lot of productivity speakers and productivity instructors will sometimes begin their talks with a demonstration. And so they come out with some rocks, some pebbles, a bag of sand, and a large glass jar. And the challenge is to fit the rocks, the pebbles, the sand into the jar. And so the audience will often suggest, well, put the sand in and then put the pebbles in and then put the rocks on top. But when the instructor, the speaker does that, the rocks don't really fit. They're piling out the top of the glass jar, as you can see there in the picture. And so then the speaker might suggest, well, how about if we put the big rocks in first and then the pebbles and then fill in with the sand all around the rocks and the pebbles, and then it all fits. And so the moral of the parable, if you will, is that we should start with the big tasks and then the medium-sized tasks, and then the time that's left over, we fill in with the little tasks that would be the sand in the demonstration. Now, the problem with this to me is that the speakers, the instructors, are really kind of being dishonest because they only bring enough rocks that they know will fit in the jar. And that is generally not true. Generally, there are way more rocks that would even fit in the jar. In fact, your desk is probably covered with all these rocks that don't even come close to fitting in the jar. And so that's what we want to talk about here today. We want to talk about how do you deal with that big pile of rocks that don't even begin to fit in the jar. So let me start out by kind of looking at this idea of maximizing your workday, having a more effective and productive workday. Let me give you some high-level thoughts here to begin and introduce some terminology. You want to be in control of the timeline. And what this would look like is when your boss shows up at the door of your office with yet another project to give you. If you are really in control of the timeline, you could respond to your boss more accurately and more constructively. And the way that you do that is because you have prioritized the task that you are working on. Now, prioritization is not about saying no to work. Prioritization is about saying yes to the right work. And so we have this expression of periodic prioritization. That is, if we can get into a regular flow, maybe every week or every couple weeks, of prioritizing the tasks that we have in front of us. So we're going to look in more detail at how to do that. There is a difference between prioritization and productivity. Productivity is about efficiency, how to be faster on your job. But if all you have is productivity, you might be digging the hole faster, but without prioritization, you could be digging the wrong hole or digging the hole in the wrong place. There's an expression today called pseudo productivity. And what this goes to is the definition of how we measure productivity. If you think back a long, long time ago, when workers were pretty much all in factories, it was pretty easy to measure productivity. How many widgets were coming off the assembly line? How many boxes of widgets got sent out every day? How many carrots got washed before they were sent to the grocery store? It was easy to measure productivity. But today's workforce, the knowledge workforce, it's really hard to measure productivity. And so what happens is companies, managers end up measuring productivity by how busy you are, how many emails you receive and send, how many Slack conversations you're a part of. And this has come to be recognized as pseudo productivity because those are not really good measures of how much you are contributing to your team and to your company. So I would suggest to you that if you are a leader of a team today, you do not want to be measuring your team based on pseudo productivity. If you're a member of a team today, I would suggest that you need to try pretty hard to try not to be measured, your success measured by pseudo productivity. One of the things you need to maximize the effectiveness of your workday is to develop patience. And here's three examples for me, three principles of patience. One is develop a taste for having problems. There are going to be problems. Things are going to go wrong. And so just have patience with that. Develop this taste, this patience for the problems that are certainly going to pop up. Embrace incrementalism. You might be working on that big task and you keep getting interrupted and you don't get it done. That's okay. Come back to it tomorrow. Come back to it the day after tomorrow. Display some patience as you embrace incrementalism, working on those big tasks day by day by day. And then this is interesting. Originality is found on the far side of unoriginality. That is, you need to have patience as you look for originality and creativity. You need to look for to have patience as you move through normal stuff, the typical stuff, the things that are happening every day that are not particularly unique or interesting. That's unoriginality. And if you can have the patience to work through that, you will break through to creativity and originality. And then you want to avoid the trap of invented urgency or false urgency. How do you deal with that? Well, I would suggest you take a pause. And the first thing you need to do is verify whether the urgency is real or not. It might not actually be time sensitive. Something that someone is identified as urgent might not really be time sensitive. That is, there might not be a cost of delay. It might not need to be dealt with immediately. Some items probably are tactically time sensitive. That is, they are urgent. They're going to have an effect on your business, an effect on revenue. And so they are urgent. They are time sensitive. I think quite often, however, items that have been identified as urgent are what you might call emotionally time sensitive. That is, there is a feeling of urgency, but it's not really urgent. It's being created by emotion, by stress, and by emotion. Now, there is a tool that you can use to try to identify and manage urgent items against not urgent items. And it's called the Eisenhower Decision Matrix. Back when he was president, Dwight Eisenhower gave a speech once that became a rather famous speech where he talks about the difference between things that are urgent and things that are important. And Stephen Covey, when he was writing the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he took that speech and turned it into a matrix that measures importance versus urgency. And he named this matrix after President Eisenhower. So we're looking here at things that are urgent, things that are crises, that are time sensitive, things that are dealing with revenue or relationships or reputation of your company. These are urgent versus things that are important. Important items are important for the strategy of your company. They're important for the long-term goals, for the long-term strategy. They're important, but they're not urgent. So this matrix takes a look at then things that are important and things that are urgent. So when you look at this matrix of the upper left-hand corner, the green box, these would be things that are both urgent and important. That is, they're a crisis, perhaps, they're time sensitive, and they impact your long-term strategy, your long-term goals. They are important. So those kind of items, you do them now. You don't have any choice in the matter. Then the blue box are things that are not urgent, but they are still important to your business. And so these are things that need to be done, but they're not time sensitive. So you decide, okay, we're going to find a time where we work on these important items. Then in the lower left-hand corner is the red box. This is the problem box. These are things that someone thinks are urgent, but to you, they are not really important. That is, they are not strategic. They are not as a part of the long-term goals of your business. So these are the tough ones. These are things hopefully you can delegate or pass off to someone else. And then the gray box, of course, they're not urgent, they're not important. Delete them, forget them, eliminate them. We're not going to have time to deal with them. So let me give you an example. So I'm a professional speaker. I get booked to speak at conferences and events. And so let's say one morning I get an email from an event planner. And this email says, "Hey, Glenn, we have an event next week and one of our speakers just canceled. Is there any way you could come and fill in? I really need to know by the end of the day." So this is an item that is important and urgent to me in my business. It's important because this is what I do. I get booked to speak at events. So yes, this is important, but it's also urgent because the event planner needs an immediate answer to whether I can do this. So I need to do this right now. I need to look, can I get an airline flight? Can I book a hotel? Do I have a session that would fit what they're looking for? I need to do this now. It's important and urgent. Now, let's say I get another email, and this is from an event planner, and they say, "Hey, Glenn, we're starting to work on our agenda for next year's conference. Can we hear from you in the next few weeks with any ideas you have for sessions you might present?" So again, this is important because this is what I do. I need to get booked at events to speak, but it's not urgent. I've got 3 weeks to get back to this event planner, so I will decide to schedule a time that I'm going to work on that. Where you want to be in this matrix is in that blue box. Now you're obviously going to have urgent things. Crises come up every day. So there will be some amount of time you are living in the green box, but hopefully most of your time can be in the blue box, where you're working on things that are important to the long-term goals and strategy of your business, but they are not urgent. They are not a crisis. The problem box to me is the red box. The red box is where you need to learn how to say no to people. And if you are a people pleaser, if you're that kind of person that just cannot say no to anyone, then you're going to be living in that red box. You're going to be dealing with things that somebody thinks is urgent, but to you, they're not really important. Are you a people pleaser? Do you have a difficult time saying no and you're stuck in that red box in the matrix? Do you tend to agree with people even if you feel differently? Do you tend to avoid conflict? Do you struggle to find free time because you're always doing things for other people, all those things that someone else thinks is urgent? Well, if you say yes to any of these, then I would say yes. You are a people pleaser and you need to learn to say no. Warren Buffett has a quote. He says, the difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything. Folks, you have to say no to a lot of good things in order to be able to say yes to a lot of great things. So, where should you say no? Let me tell you, you should say no to perfection. Perfection is a thief of your time. Say no to perfection. Say no to negative people. Say no to complacency. Say no to people that have a negative mindset or trying to give you a negative mindset. Say no to making excuses. Hey, everybody screws up. Everybody makes mistakes. Own it. Take responsibility. Say no to making excuses. Where do you say yes? You say yes to work you love doing. You say yes to maintaining consistency both in your life and in your capacity at work for how much you know you can do. When you make a promise, then keep it. You need to say yes to finding time to rest and rejuvenate. Taking a pause is a good thing. Pauses are good for performance. Think about taking a pause every now and then as kind of like that glass of water that's sitting on your desk. And whenever you're thirsty, you reach over and you take a drink. Find time to rest and rejuvenate. Say yes to taking a pause. And then say yes to knowing what you are capable of and what you are not capable of. So, maximizing your workday, these are some initial thoughts, some initial terminology. And the last one there is a big one. Be in a position to say no. Folks, saying no is actually saying yes to the things that matter. There is a difference between efficiency and effectiveness. I love this definition here. Effectiveness is doing the right thing in the optimal way. So, efficiency, productivity helps you discover that optimal way, but effectiveness, prioritizing your tasks, is doing the right thing in the optimal way. You need to do your best work at your best time, in your best space, in your best state. That's how you achieve effectiveness. What is your best time? All times of day are not created equal. And this graph here shows the three stages of timing as you flow through a day. So for most people, you start the day, and in the morning is when performance wise you hit your peak. As the graph here says, you're highly vigilant, you're in your best mood, you got the most amount of energy. And then the morning ends, you have lunch, and after lunch, early afternoon, you kind of fall into this trough here, major drop in your mood and your performance. And then maybe in the end of the day, you kind of hit a recovery period. In those last couple hours, your mood kind of comes back up, but it's not the same as it was in the morning with that peak. Many people, most people, this would be their flow through the three stages of timing in a day. Now, I know some people go in it in reverse. So that might be you. Maybe you kind of hit a little bit of energy and good work first thing in the morning, then you hit the trough, and then you hit your peak in the afternoon. So the key is to understand how these times of day apply to you. So if this is your flow, what you're looking at here, you hit the peak in the morning, then what do you want to be doing in the morning? You don't want to be doing piddling little stuff. You want to be doing something that's big and hard and complicated. That's what you want to do when you've got that most amount of energy at the peak. So you want to be doing your best work at your best time in your best space. Where is the best space that you can be most effective and productive? And maybe you need quiet. Maybe you need not to be disturbed by other people. What is your best space? And then you need to be in your best state, rested, hydrated, in your best state. This is how you achieve effectiveness. So, here are some questions that you need to consider. Do you know what your top priorities are every day? Do you focus on what's urgent and what's important? Can you use the Eisenhower matrix as I showed you a couple minutes ago? Is what you need to focus on clearly defined? If you're interrupted, then can you go back and refocus on what's important? So if you look at these four questions and you say no, or I'm not sure, or I don't know, then I think you need to discover what it means to prioritize prioritization. Prioritization of your tasks is the process of organizing those tasks, those projects, those goals, both in the order of their importance and their urgency, because you're trying to optimize productivity. And importantly, you're trying to optimize the allocation of resources. Prioritization is a defense against distractions, the distractions that keep a team working at their peak potential because everybody doesn't understand what is the most important thing. What should I be working on now? What is the right work to be doing? And that causes distraction. Prioritization helps you align people's voices and people's efforts so that you're not working at cross purposes. So one person on the team working on what they think is most important, somebody else on the team is working on something else that they think is most important. Prioritization, being aware of your priorities, helps you create better plans, address critical needs, make smarter decisions. Folks, prioritizing links your options to your choices to your decisions to your actions, and your actions to your outcomes. There is a difference between planning and prioritizing, and you need both. Prioritization by itself is not going to achieve the effectiveness we're looking for here, and neither is planning without prioritizing. So when you prioritize your tasks and you know what is the important thing, what matters most, then planning takes what matters most and transforms that into concrete outcomes. So, in order for your team, for your organization to do a good job of planning, you need to start by prioritizing. When you do this, then you realize you are in control of the timeline. When the boss comes to you with another project to add to the list, again, you can respond to your boss more accurately and more constructively because you've prioritized and you're in control of the timeline. Many people will say that prioritize is the most important verb in business. In fact, I would say that if you look closely at your work environment, everything is either a prioritization problem or a prioritization opportunity. So, how do you do this? Why do we struggle? Why do we struggle to prioritize? I mean, if it's so important, as I just said, the most important verb in the business, then why is it we struggle? Well, there is a myth of multitasking. People think, yeah, I'll just multitask. I'm going to work on multiple things at once. I'll get them all done. I don't need to prioritize. And folks, you might not realize that your brain is not wired to allow you to do multiple things, multiple tasks with equal efficiency. It's just not. And so you might think I can multitask and I don't need to prioritize. That is a myth. There's a paradox of choice. Some people think having a choice is power. So I don't want to prioritize. I want to keep having a choice. That choice gives me power. Whereas the paradox of it is that when you have a choice, then sometimes you're afraid to make a decision because you're afraid you're going to make the wrong decision. So you don't want to actually prioritize. We all know we live in an age of distraction, email, social media gets in the way, keeps us busy. We don't have time to focus on prioritizing. If there's a lack of clear goals in your organization, if you work for an organization where everything's important all the time, or there's no clear goals defined at all, it's going to be hard to prioritize. And there's an emotional component. Folks, there's always an emotional component, fear or insecurity that get in the way of prioritizing. So there's a lot of reasons we struggle to prioritize. You need to try to set these aside, and let me give you a model, a process model for doing prioritization. And this comes from a wonderful little book called Managing Priorities. It's written by a guy named Harry Max, and he has created in this book a model that he calls DGAP, DEGAP. And this is an acronym for the 5 steps of this prioritization process model. So I want to take you through this. The first step, the D in DGAP, is to decide that you're going to take on this model. And this could take you a couple hours. So you might have to say, the importance of this, what the information I have when we're done with this is worth the hour or two it's going to take. But you need to make that decision. Yes, we're going to prioritize and we're going to go through this model. So if you decide yes, then the second step, the E, is engage. I'm engaging in this process. I'm committing to this process. I'm identifying the stakeholders in my organization that will help me identify the items that need to be prioritized and where the information is going to come from about those items. And then I dive into gathering. This is the big step here. I gather all the items to be prioritized. I talk to the stakeholders. I listen to what they have to say. So I'm gathering data about the items that I'm going to prioritize. Now you might notice I keep using the word items. When you're going through a prioritization process like I'm describing here, you might think you're only prioritizing tasks or projects or a to-do list, and certainly you are. But you might also be prioritizing people or locations or products or services. And so all those things kind of get lumped together in this model and they're referred to as items. Step 4, the A in DGAP, is okay, I've gathered all these items and now I want to arrange them, identify them, get all the information together about each item we're going to prioritize, make sure each item is unique. If they're kind of overlapped, it's hard to separate them and do a good job of prioritizing. And then step 5 is the actual prioritize exercise. And there are frameworks, there are sorting techniques. I'm going to show you these in just a moment. So, should I take the time to do this prioritization that I'm describing to you? Well, are you in any of these situations? Are you starting something new that's important? Are you trying to make a difficult decision? Are you trying to fix something that's important? Are you preparing for rapid growth within your team or within your organization? Are you planning for some crucial progress that's going to come down the line? I would say if you say yes to any of these, then you should be taking the time to go through this process model and prioritize prioritization. So I've decided, I've engaged, I've gathered, I've arranged the items, and now we want to prioritize these items. And so there are different approaches. You could use a visual framework to do prioritization. The Eisenhower matrix that I showed you a few minutes ago, that is a visual framework. There's another one I'll show you here in a second called pruning the tree. You might want to use some sorting techniques to prioritize the items in your list. Stack ranking, paired comparison, the Pareto analysis, or the 80-20 rule as it's known, simple weighted scoring. These are examples of sorting techniques to prioritize a list of items. Again, I'll show you these in just a second. And then maybe you want to do more of a simulation. I bet in a team at some point in your career you've done dot voting, and I'll remind you what that is in a second. You also need to kind of decide, well, is this prioritization effort I'm going through, is this what we would call episodic? That is this the one-off? I have a big decision to make. We're going to go through this prioritization, but we're only just doing it for this one instance. Or is this something that's periodic? I've got to set up a regular every week, every couple weeks, every month. We're going to periodically go through the process and reprioritize our to-do list. Or maybe it even falls into just a continuous, hey, I just know from day to day, from week to week, We need to prioritize and reprioritize, and it just becomes part of our daily workflow. So let me show you some of these examples here. First of all, a visualization is this technique called pruning the tree. So you've got this imaginary tree, and you've got branches and leaves on the tree, and those represent the items that you are prioritizing. And so maybe in a team kind of brainstorming session, you've got these sticky notes that represent items that need to be prioritized. You're sticking them on branches, related items go on the same branch. And when you've got this all laid out, you can look at this and go, wow, that branch has way too many items. Or maybe this branch hardly has any items. And this can be a visual way for you to trim, prune the tree, cut down on how many items are going to be in your to-do list, in your task list. So this works well in a team environment and a brainstorming session where you're strategizing on where you should be putting your resources and your effort. And then once you've pruned the tree and you've got the list of items down to something more reasonable, then you can use one of these sorting techniques to actually sort and prioritize the items. One of the simplest techniques, sorting techniques, is called stack ranking. And this is a basic technique. You're simply listing everything in your to-do list, your task list, from important all the way down to not important. You keep iterating, you move things around, as it says, until it feels right. Sometimes people call this force ranking because if you're doing this properly, you are forced to take your list of items and put them in a numbered list. And you're not allowed to have a bunch of stuff at level 2 or a bunch of stuff at level 3. You have to come down and you have to say, okay, if I have to put one in front of the other, which one is going to go on top, which one is going to go underneath? And thinking this way, as that last bullet says, kind of causes you to discover the underlying reasons where one item might be more or less important than another. That's stack ranking. Another sorting technique is called pairwise comparison, and this is where you're comparing one item against another. So in this example on the left-hand side, I'm trying to sort the 6 colors in the list. So I compare them one to each other. So I start out in the middle square there, the voting square, where I compare red to the other 5 colors. So red versus orange, orange wins. Red versus yellow, red wins. Red versus green, green wins. Red versus blue, blue wins. Red versus purple, red wins. So when I've compared red to the other 5 colors, red had 2 wins. So you do this for all 6 of the items in the options list, and then you end up over there in box number 3 with the results where you've sorted these doing this pairwise comparison. The Pareto principle, you're probably kind of familiar with this. This is the idea that 20% of your effort produces 80% of your results. This was created way back in the 1800s by an Italian economist named Pareto. And what this does is separate the items in your list into 2 groups, the 20% that matter and the remaining 80%. So for example, if you had 10 items in your list and you were trying to prioritize your list, you would identify the 2 items on that list that produce 80% of the results, and those would be 1 and 2 in your list. 20% of the effort, these 2 items produce 80% of the results. Simple weighted scoring is a little more complicated. It assigns weights to criteria that you have come up with. So again, going back to the DGAP process, if you've identified items and you've talked to stakeholders, the stakeholders might say, well, this is the criteria you should be using to prioritize the items on this list. So in this example here, I've got 3 locations. I'm trying to prioritize or choose between location A, B, and C. And my stakeholders have identified 5 criteria to compare the locations to each other: rent, electricity, condition, safety, visibility. But then further, we have assigned weights to each of those criteria. So rent should count for 25% of the decision, electricity 20%, et cetera. So you look at each location and you say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, I give location A a 3 for rent. I give location A a 3.5 for electricity, a 4 for condition, etc. And then I use the weight to calculate the weighted average. So 0.25 times 3 plus zero point 0.2 times 3.5 plus zero point 0.15 times 4. And when I add all those up, I get a weighted average for location A, B, and C. So this works well when you've got stakeholders to give you the criteria, when you've got a team discussion perhaps going on, because this forces you to identify criteria and then also to weight the criteria as you're doing the prioritization. And this last one, this would be more of a simulation. You've probably done this in a team at some point in your professional career. You got 5 different ideas. You give everybody on the team a set of little colored dot stickers, and they go around and say, well, I give idea 1, 1 dot, but I give idea 4, 4 dots. And so this is an easy way to kind of show priorities. It's a nice collaborative team thing to do. And when you're done, you've got a visual representation of which ideas seem to have gotten the most votes or would be the highest priority. So that's some different techniques for prioritizing a list of items. And the DGAP process is a model you can go through to really engage in this prioritization model in an effective way. Now, once you've created priorities, you need to be able to communicate them effectively to the rest of the organization. So, some thoughts about how to do that. You want to limit your priorities to a handful. This shows people that you have pruned the tree, that you've cut down on the number of items, that you don't have this massive list that you just can't decide. You've done the work of limiting the priorities. You want to provide concise explanations of what each priority means. You don't want generalizations. Let's invest more in infrastructure. What does that mean? You need something in more detail, something more concise. You want to clarify how priorities can be accomplished. You want to explain why a priority matters. You want to measure progress as you move towards achieving the priority to show that you're committed to this, and further, you're committed because you're setting targets out in the future. So when you do these 6 things here, you're effectively communicating the priorities that you've set to your management, to your leadership, to the rest of your organization. So how do you create an example, a routine of prioritization? So this is an example of a morning routine that you might go through that includes a simple prioritization. So number one, make a list of everything you've got going on. So you come in the morning and the first thing you do, make a list. So to-dos, deadlines, problems you're working on, tasks you need to get started on, long-term goals. Let me tell you, folks, getting everything out of your head and written down is the single best way to kind of gain perspective on what's in front of you. So you make this list. Then you go through the list and identify what are the items on this list that I have been avoiding or I'm procrastinating on. Which of the items in this list, so maybe you mark those, say, with A for avoiding. Then you go through the list again and you say, well, which of these items are time sensitive? And so you maybe mark all those with a T. And then you go through the list and you say, what are the items that will help you make progress towards a longer term goal? So maybe you mark those with a L. So I've got this list of everything I got going on. I've identified the things I'm avoiding, the things that are time sensitive, the items that will help me make progress towards a longer term goal. Now, those 3 categories, there's probably more than one. So now you have to kind of rank these. So you need to do a stack ranking kind of exercise here against the list of things you're procrastinating on, the list of things that are time sensitive, the list of things that are longer term kind of goals. If you're wondering, how do I stack rank a list of time sensitive items? Here's a suggestion: kind of calculating in your mind the cost of delay for each of those time sensitive items. How much value will this give us? How important is it that we do it quickly? Plus, what thing can't we do because we're going to do this instead? If you kind of look across those three, that creates a cost of delay. So that could help you in number three here to stack rank the items that are time sensitive. So when you're done with this exercise, you now have your number one item that you're avoiding, the number one time sensitive thing, and the number one item that'll help you towards a long-term goal. And you look at this list and say, do these really reflect my three most important priorities? And if yes, then you dig in on those three items. So let's talk for a minute about that list of things you're avoiding or procrastinating. Folks, procrastination is not about being lazy. Procrastination is rooted in fear. You are afraid of something, and that's why you're avoiding working on this task, you're procrastinating on this task. So how do you deal with procrastination? Acknowledge, what is the fear? What is it? Why am I not working on this? Why am I procrastinating on this? What is the fear? Forgive yourself for procrastinating. Let me tell you, everybody procrastinates. Everybody procrastinates. This is not about being lazy. What we need in the world are more good procrastinators. A good procrastinator looks at that giant pile of rocks on their desk and they're willing to say, I'm prioritizing. These are the ones I'm going to work on. These are the ones I'm going to neglect. That's a good procrastinator. A bad procrastinator looks at that pile of rocks and is paralyzed, says, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to start on. And so they don't start on any of it. So just get started, because procrastination is eating into your time. If you're not working on these items you're avoiding, it's probably because you're dinking around in email, wasting your time in social media. You're wasting time. So make a plan for a plan. Figure out the next specific action that can get you started on this item that you are avoiding. Working on that big avoidance. And especially if this can be the thing you do first thing in the morning. Of those three items we identified on the previous page, I'm going to work for the first 30, 45 minutes, the first hour on this big avoidance. And that's going to give you energy. It's going to offer a reward on your own because you're going to get through the rest of the day with more energy. There's an expression, pay yourself first. And this comes from the world of finance. In the world of finance, you get your paycheck on Friday. And what a lot of people do is they say, okay, I'm going to pay all my bills, I'm going to live my life. And at the end of the week, if there's any money left over, I'll put that into my savings account, or I'll put that aside to pay for my kids' college education. And of course, that never happens. You pay your bills, you live your life. At the end of the week, there's nothing left. So a financial advisor says, pay yourself first. So when you get that paycheck at the end of the week, the first thing you do is put some money aside for your savings, or put some money aside for the kids' college fund. And then you pay your bills, and then you live your life. That's the financial advice, pay yourself first. And the same thing applies in the world of effective workplaces. That is, start out the day by attacking that big avoidance. Pay yourself first. Most people fall in the temptation of saying, I'm going to work on all the little stuff. I'm going to deal with all of that. I'm going to get all the little things done, all the little tasks done, get them all out of the way. And at the end of the day, the time that's left, then I'll work on this big project. And there's never any time left. So the productivity advice, the effectiveness advice is pay yourself first. There's an expression in productivity and business called eat the frog. That's what we're talking about here, folks. At the beginning of the day, eat the frog. And this comes from a quote from Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, if you eat a live frog first thing in the morning, you can go through the rest of your day knowing the worst is behind you. So, the advice that I leave you here is that first day, that first hour of the day, you've identified this big avoidance, eat the frog. Say to yourself, this is the most important thing I should be working on now. This is the thing that I and only I can do to bring value to my business. I'm going to spend the first hour of my day eating the frog. I'm going to pay myself first. And then that is behind me. And then I move on to the rest of the day. All righty, I'm winding down here. So let me just show you a couple books. If you'd like to read some more, study some more about this subject, I already mentioned the Managing Priorities book, which is a great book to study and read if you want to get into the DGAP process and learn more about those different frameworks for prioritization I told you about. This other book here, 4,000 Weeks. 4,000 weeks is the average number of weeks that a person has in their life. And this fellow, Oliver Burkeman, he wrote this wonderful, entertaining, humorous book, Time Management for Mortals. I really would recommend that book. If you want to delve down into the whole idea of eat that frog, Brian Tracy has written a whole little book about this. It's a bestseller. It's been around for a long time. How to Stop Procrastinating, Eat the Frog. And then I really didn't have time to get into this other book, but this is a great book, Slow Productivity. It's the art of slowing down and accomplishing things without burnout. Another great book I would recommend. Just to remind you, this is what I do these days. If I can be of help to you, your team, your organization, shoot me an email there, glenandersonspeaks@gmail.com, or you can go to my website, glenandersonspeaks.com. There's some ideas out there of things that I speak about, and you can reach me through my website. But I'd love to help you out if I could do that in some way. So, maximize your workday, folks. Prioritize prioritization. Determine what is your current state and where you want to be. What is your desired state? Implement the DGAP model process for doing prioritization. Identify what you're avoiding and eat the frog first thing in the morning. Be in control of your timeline by identifying what you prioritized and learn how to say no. Don't fall into that trap of being a people pleaser that always says yes. Be able to say no. And I love this quote from Stephen Covey. He says, if the ladder is not leaning against the right wall, every step we take gets us to the wrong place faster. How do you know the ladder's leaning against the right wall? Because you prioritized prioritization. All right, that is it. Sammy, I will turn this back over to you. I will stop sharing my screen, and there you are.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I appreciate the presentation today. Wonderful job. I did not see any questions come through the Q&A, so we're going to go ahead and close this out for now. Thank you, everyone who joined us. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this has been recorded. Keep an eye out for an email from me so you can get a link to that presentation. And as Glenn gave you his direct email address, if you have any questions or want to talk anything directly with Glenn, feel free to get in touch with him as well. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.